Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar about how Codeium gets developers to trust Windsurf for writing 90% of their code. I am Dianne. I lead our product management team focused around research, which includes building new versions of Claude, including our most recent 3.7 Sonnet model, as well as frontier capabilities like agentic coding, tool use, computer use, and thinking. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Kevin who leads product engineering at Codeium. We're going to be spending a bit of time talking a little bit generally about agents, but we'll also be doing a bit of a fire chat together and answer some Q&A questions from the audience. So very quickly, just a few housekeeping items. If you miss any part of this webinar, there will be a recording of the webinar within 24 hours. If there's any questions or ideas that you have, feel free to submit them via the questions widget in the portal. And we really love feedback. We're hoping to run more of these webinars for the future. So we'll love any feedback you have about the content or what you would like to hear in the future. So like I mentioned, we'll be talking a bit about generally agents, how Codeium built the Windsurf coding agent, and a Fireside Q&A. So let's jump in. So what do we mean by agents? I think agents is a very hot topic and word in this year. At Anthropic, we really think about agents as systems that can autonomously plan and take complex actions without necessarily a human-guided set of recipes or workflows. And from talking to many enterprises, what we really heard is, traditionally in the AI models, maybe pre-3.5 Sonnet, most of the models can do certain actions if they're well guided by a user with a set of instructions. But as the models become more intelligent and more agentic, they no longer need so much scaffolding or harness to be able to be more goal-oriented on figuring out how to self-recover, solve open-ended problems, and do things that might not be easy to predict upfront. And some of the use cases that we've been really excited about from a customer perspective that's been unlocked include agentic search, autonomous coding, as we'll hear about more, as well as customer support use cases. And so really bring AI and LLMs from a world of just being a chatbot to a true agent that can help you and meet you where you are. In terms of agents, we really think of it in sort of three elements, which is number one, there is giving the agents in these systems the knowledge that is required to understand and simulate a view of the world. This could be things like knowledge bases or code repos, or as well as better use of its context window, including Claude's 200K context. Additionally, being able to communicate, whether that's talking to the customer and the user to get more information, or to actually issue orders and take action by issuing tool calls in order to advance and take action towards a set of goals. Most importantly, this is underpinned by the ability of the model to be trained with safety at its core. So we have both training within the model as well as additional systems to ensure things like harm and safety always come first and foremost. So with 3.7 Sonnet, we launched the world's first hybrid thinking and reasoning model, which means, and this was very much something that I think philosophically is how Anthropic thinks about reasoning, which is that it's not a separate model or capability, but it's just core to these systems becoming more performant and more valuable for users. Just like, it shouldn't take 3 minutes to know the time right now is 1 p.m. Eastern, but maybe for a more complex question like generate a website end-to-end based on my previous product experience, we think it really is important for these models to be able to think both fast when necessary, and as well as take more slow and deliberate planning when needed. This has also been supported by additional improvements that we've made to 3.7 Sonnet on tool use and function calling. The ability of the model to know when to think is important, but not all problems can be solved just by thinking out loud in a first principles manner. Sometimes it's actually much more important to be able to call a tool and to get more information, whether or not it's to a search or to take some action and actually test out if a certain path is correct, and then adjust its plans and self-recover or self-correct as needed. We're also super excited about improvements on additional agentic capabilities like computer use, which is both valuable for general consumer and prosumer use cases, as well as for coding specific applications like being able to create websites and test front-end code in a product development, a test-driven development fashion. Coding has been one of the areas that Anthropic has led the pack. One of the things that we really focus around with 3.7 Sonnet is extending our lead in agentic coding, which is, as I mentioned, the combination of the model to be able to write high-quality production code, as well as to be able to plan deliberately, to think fast and slow, given a problem at hand. So if you're doing autocomplete, it should be able to do that very quickly. If you're asking it, let's say, to do a refactoring, it needs to understand much more of not just the first layer of connections across different files, but also the second and third order dependencies. And we've been really excited by some of our evaluations and performance on things like Sweet Bench Verified, which is one of the hallmarks of agentic coding performance. I think a lot of this is really exciting, but what's even more exciting is the ability of these models to be actually deployed to really help developers. And so we've been really excited about all of our partnership to date with Windsurf and Codeium. And it's been fantastic for me personally to see the journey that Windsurf has been on. So with that, I want to turn it over to Kevin and hear a bit more about how Codeium has built Windsurf over the last few months. Kevin, over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Dianne. Yeah, happy to be here. We are Windsurf, and we have heavily benefited from some of the work that Anthropic has done to bring these models to production. So I'm going to be spending some time today talking a bit about Windsurf, our kind of more unique agentic approach, and how we've been able to bring kind of LLM capabilities to developers all around the world. So my name is Kevin. I lead product engineering over at Windsurf. I'm coming to you live from Mountain View, California. We have been building Windsurf for around 6 months now. And we set out to kind of build the best coding agent editor that we could. And we've been doing sort of some related work. Some of you might be familiar with Codeium. We have a suite of extensions that work across VS Code, JetBrains, Vim, etc. And so we've kind of been in this dev tool game, and we've been working with Anthropic for a while now to try and bring the best capabilities, and specifically now agentic capabilities, to our users. And so how we think about agents, we want to make sure that we can deliver the most amount of production code to you with the least amount of explicit user input. So the way that we think about this problem is there's all this information out in the world. You could type out very long prompts and get good results, right? But how can we minimize the amount that you have to type, how much you have to tell us as you're coding, and maximize the number of lines of code that are accepted by you and actually put into production? We launched on November 13th, and it's been incredible to see kind of the community adoption of what we've put out into the world. Some fun facts about Windsurf is that we've written about 4.5 billion lines of code. Cascade is the name of our agent inside of Windsurf. And at this point, these stats might be a little bit out of date, but since we started this webinar, we've actually had thousands and thousands of user messages coming in every minute. And we're really proud, and it's very cool to see some of the work that our users are doing with Windsurf as their tool. And so today, I'm going to spend some time talking a bit about kind of the principles behind building an agentic editor like Windsurf, and some of the technical challenges that we've had, specifically talking about 3 different categories. So trajectories, this idea of how can we read your mind? As a tool, how can we take in your history of actions and predict what you are trying to do? So that's number one. And we're going to spend a decent amount of time talking about that during this webinar because it's a bit technical and it's quite interesting. The second principle that we adopt is this idea of meta learning. So what does this mean? This means building a product that actually learns from its users. So this could mean on an organizational level. It could mean on an individual level. The idea being over time, you shouldn't have to repeat yourself. So if you are building with an agent and you tell it, hey, I want to use pip as my package manager or npm, it should be able to remember these things and kind of tune its performance to your preferences. And the same applies for organizations, right? If you're working with a coworker, you will learn how to run this particular stack. You'll learn how to run certain commands, and your teammates should benefit from those learnings. And then finally, scale with intelligence. So this is quite interesting and something that has particularly impacted kind of the agentic step function that we've seen in the industry. What this means is we want to build products that inherit from the gains of LLMs. The models have been improving at such a rapid rate, right? We saw 3.5, we see 3.7, 3.7 thinking. Like there's so many models coming out into the world, and each of them kind of provide another step function in model capability. And what we've learned over time is that we should not build infrastructure to kind of crutch the current day's model performance. So we should not spend too much time trying to build heavy infrastructure that supports maybe some edge cases that the model fails at, because we know that inevitably models will continue to improve and the performance will just continue to get better. And so we want our product to inherit from those learnings. So these are the kind of three principles that we use when we're building the product. And specifically today, we're going to be talking about trajectories. So trajectories, again, is this idea of how do we read your mind? If the agent is working in the background, if it's kind of, think of it as a pair programmer. It's kind of sitting over your shoulder, trying to understand what you have done in order to understand and predict what you will do. And the way we do this is through this idea of a unified timeline. And I think this is something that's quite cool and quite unique, and you'll start feeling it if you use the product. If you think of your sequence of actions that you've taken, so for example, the benefit of being an editor is that we can see what files you're viewing. We can see, maybe what you're debugging or what you're running in your terminal, how you're searching through your code base, and all of this kind of inform the agent what you will do. So think of it again as like a pair programmer. So we're kind of watching passively over your shoulder so that we can build up an understanding of what you're doing. And the really important thing here is that it's a unified timeline between both the user and the agent. So as you are going off and navigating your code base, making edits, simultaneously, the Windsurf agent can behind the scenes perform background research and contribute to this notion of a shared timeline, so that the next time you autocomplete or the next time you write a chat message, all of these are informed by this kind of holistic unified state of the world. And if we wanted to break this down even further, and I want to make sure we touch on kind of the technical considerations that we've had here, you can really break down trajectories into three separate stages, if you may. Three separate places where we spend time on our kind of agentic harness. So the first one is contextual understanding. This is the idea of understanding what source, using sources to understand what a user has done. The second one is knowing what the user's intent is. And knowing is maybe a strong word, but it's kind of predicting, right? It's that idea of like knowing where they are going to go. And finally, there's actions. So if we have all this information, what can we do now, with or without explicit user permission? So we'll kind of dive into these three different steps. The first one is context retrieval. And this is something that we've been working on for the last 2 years. Given that we've had kind of the Codeium extension product, we've kind of been at this game of how do you get the best information for the current generation that you're about to do. An analogy here is if you think about an agent breaking it down into kind of senses, brain, and arms, it's this idea that like senses are the context, right? You're like seeing things, you're hearing things. And then at some point you have to transition to the brain, which is like thinking and reasoning over those things, and then the arms, which is actually making changes. In this case, these are our senses. So can we expand the number of senses that you have so that you can read from a bunch of different sources? And the challenge here is that a software engineer really needs to know a lot of things in order to do their job effectively. And maybe this is kind of the delta between a junior software engineer and a very experienced senior software engineer. there's a million things that they could remember and should remember. How do you reason over these things? So a short list that I've put up, it was very quick to make this slide because I was like, there are so many things that you have to take into account. You've got reading files, right? The actual contents of your code. You've got the most recent edits that you made, right? You made a sequence of edits and you're like, okay, what's the next thing I want to do? Things that you're running in your terminal, right? You have a history of a bunch of terminal commands that you can rerun and use that as context. What files you've been looking at, what do you have even in front of you that is open? And then this doesn't even kind of include the vast majority of sources which are on Git, right? You're on GitHub and you're looking at PRs, you're looking at commits, you're looking at blames. You're going on a browser and you're actually searching for documentation, going to docs, going to, NPM registries. Like there are so many things that you can look at to inform what code you're going to generate. And then there's also personal preference, right? This idea of personal and organizational preferences. Every company writes software in a slightly different way, or in some cases, very severely different ways. And these are all just ways that kind of factor into how we should generate code. The difficulty here is how can we retrieve and read through all these sources, because they're all very different, and reason and come up with a plan of action. An example of an integration that we've had is terminal context. So to kind of set the stage, you can imagine you're making changes in your editor. You might ask the agent on the side, hey, start these unit tests. And then you might run the unit tests in your terminal. And those unit tests, let's just say they fail, right? You didn't do it correctly on the first time. If you go back to the agent, it should behave like a pair programmer would. You would just say, help me fix whatever's going wrong. There's a lot of products out there. Sometimes that context is not going to end up in the context of the agent. And so it actually has no idea what you're doing. And we thought that this was something that we wanted to solve from the get-go. And we felt it was very important that there was never this kind of mental disconnect. And so we instrumented things like terminal commands being part of the unified timeline. And in this case, if your unit test were to fail, your stack trace would appear, and then you would go back to the agent. That agent would say, oh, I see that you ran this command and it failed with this. Let's go off and use that as context to then go off and fix that. The second part is the brain, right? And this is something that has significantly improved over the last year, to the point where agents were not possible a year ago, right? The 2025 is like the reason it is the year of the agent. And there are a couple of like big step functions that companies like Anthropic have basically allowed and enabled for products. And this is the idea that you have all this information. We've done the retrieval, we've done looking at your terminal, right? But then what do you actually do next? It's knowing what the next couple steps are. And so it's this goal of combining explicit input, right? What the user is literally typing into the prompt, with the kind of massive, it's like that iceberg analogy. So many things under the surface that need to be taken into consideration. And this was basically an unsolved problem a year ago. And we were experimenting with agents for quite some time behind the scenes, and we never felt like it reached that bar of quality that we wanted to put into the world. What was unique about Windsurf is that with the advent of Sonnet 3.5, we were able to finally achieve like solid results, like very useful agentic capabilities, where we could feed it a bunch of information and it would know, okay, let's do steps 1, 2, and 3. And this has only gotten better. We saw the release of 3.7. This was, again, a step function in the way to do these kind of multi-step plans. And then with the introduction of thinking as well, this has just only improved the ability for Windsurf and honestly other agents, across the industry, being able to kind of grok and understand what to do next. And then finally, there's that idea of arms. And really what this means is tools. And so for those of you that don't know, there's this way for LLMs to kind of hook into the, I was going to say natural world, but that's not exactly it. Kind of hook into the actual code base, right? How can it actually go from thinking to making changes? And I think this is, again, one of these things that was unlocked kind of in the last year that has completely changed the game and made it so that the current users today can inherit kind of the leaps and bounds that we've seen in agentic technology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what this means. We're seeing basically the ability for an LLM to output a set of tools that it knows it has in its toolkit to be able to make changes. This can include things like writing to a file, making edits, searching the web, I'll show you a more complete list in a second. But this has made it so that LLMs are no longer just kind of knowledge bases. Before, we were in this world of assistants and chatbots, and that world was very cool, created a lot of shareholder value, if you may. But we're now in this world where we can actually the LLM can make changes for you and speed up that process of execution. And that's what's really exciting about 2025. And then the addition of things like MCP has meant we can do even more in the natural world than we could before. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the possibilities there. So for example, if you were to search the web, let's just say you're making a query, it kind of relies on current data. Maybe it's the release of a new version of React or something, right? Version 19. Traditionally, there would be that knowledge cutoff, and everyone's experienced I don't have access to information beyond some cutoff date. That has completely changed. Now that you've given the agent the ability to look things up online, a product like Windsurf is first able to say, okay, they're asking about recent data. They're asking about some documentation that's live. Let me go off and search the web. And that search the web has arguments and it has an output. And the LLM is able to know what arguments to pass in that would best yield kind of a satisfactory output. So in this case, you put in a query, you'd put in maybe a domain that you want to filter on, we give you some relevant pages. Now that doesn't stop there. The next step would be, let's actually read those URLs. So that's yet another tool for the LLM to say, okay, let's take that URL and create an outline, because you can't read the entire page at once. It's just too much, right? It's very similar to how a human would operate. If you go to Wikipedia, you're not going to read every line of Wikipedia in order to get the answer that you want. Instead, you're going to look at the outline, look at the table of contents, if you may. And then you're going to use a third tool, which is viewing that chunk, looking at that particular section of the page. You can think of it as like scrolling to the appropriate section, that appropriate part that fits in your window, and then reading that text. And so you can see how you're able to chain these rather complex, very flexible and robust workflows into a sequence of tool calls. And there are so many tools that Windsurf provides and that MCP provides. So for example, there's this category of file system and code operations. This is like reading files, it's running terminal commands, listing, running ls in a directory so that you can actually see and analyze the project. There's things on the kind of more retrieval context side. So you've got semantic search, you've got web search that we just talked about, the idea of memories, right? How do you store and retrieve something that you remember about the user? There's just simple things like grep, right? How do you just look for a certain substring? And then finally, there's this idea of MCP, and this has been really exciting to see how customers of MCP have been adopting this and enabling our users to then use their third-party service in the Windsurf agent. So for example, if there's a Figma MCP, we can now hook in and actually read information from a user's Figma account, whether it be an artboard or some other metadata, to inform our generation. And so if you think about the long tail of what users could do in the product, they've really come up with some quite creative workflows. You can now query, you can open browsers, you can literally control Chrome using Windsurf via MCP, and it can self-debug and like screenshot itself in order to make progress. That's like insane. It's completely mind-blowing. And this is where we're seeing this like exponential increase in productivity and in feature set, because we're now engaging with these really long list of MCP tools that any user can now enable. And our goal is to make it so that Windsurf, it's as easy to enable those things as it would be just pressing a button and saying, I use Figma, I use Slack, let's turn it on. And so we're really excited about kind of the future of what it means to expand the muscles, the tools that Windsurf can use. And again, I've kind of mentioned this, but none of this would be possible without sort of the gains that we've seen in the last, year. It's easy to point at the last year, but it's been years and years of work that Dianne and team have been spending on these sorts of models. And there are a number of things that I want to call out that are quite cool about the way that Anthropic has approached this problem. So on a little bit more technical level, like tokens are the input, tokens are the output, and tokens can be expensive, right? It's like a lot of compute, and we want to give the best possible experience to our users without kind of going bankrupt. And token usage efficiency has become incredibly important. And the way that we've kind of combated this is through this idea of prompt caching. It's the idea of taking remember that really big list of things that we were taking into context? We want to be able to cache that, put it in our prompt, so that if you were to continue to generate, right, if you generate the same thing with the same prefix 5 times, it should be cheaper on the 2nd through 5th time, right? Because a lot of that information should be kind of cached in memory, if you may. And so we've kind of we spent a lot of time engineering our prompting to work with token usage efficiency, or to work with prompt caching, and we've seen massive results, right? The Windsurf product would not be the price it is today if it wasn't for a technology like this, an approach like this. We've also seen tool performance being just remarkably good. I mean, this has been improving, but the agent rarely hallucinates tools. And I think you can tell, if you were to switch models, you can kind of see where the strengths and weaknesses are. But we've been very satisfied with the ability for the agent, for Windsurf to say, I have this set of tools, here's what I need to do next. And you add on the fact that the MCP ecosystem is blossoming. We're very bullish on just like tool use in general. And then finally, Windsurf is an enterprise-ready product. Anthropic is also an enterprise-ready product. And there are a number of things that need to happen in order for us to enable some of the largest businesses in the world to use a product like Windsurf. And I hope that every business is able to use a product like Windsurf. And this includes things like ZDR retention, right? You cannot service a Fortune 500 customer if you're just uploading their code base and it just sits on some, cold storage up in the cloud, right? These are not, you need to be able to service and meet them where they are from a security perspective. There's also uptime, right? Models they're pretty intense. They're pretty complicated. The infrastructure required to deploy an inference server is quite difficult. And so as a result, you need pretty high uptime. And then finally, we've been able to partner with Anthropic, which has been a pleasure and a privilege to be able to kind of iterate on some of these latest models to know that the Windsurf users are going to get the best experience when they're using a particular Anthropic model. And so you might say, okay, where are we going with this? And I want to touch on a couple different areas that we're particularly excited about. We believe that over time, we will have effortless personalized development. So you might be familiar with this idea of a rules file. It's this idea of you're kind of explicitly typing into your editor, like who you are, what you prefer, all these sorts of things. We believe that 99% of those things will just be encoded by the end of the year based on your usage of the product. Over time, we will just remember that you prefer to use TypeScript over JavaScript. And we'll be able to kind of cater to your workflow. We also will believe in a world where we will generate full end-to-end PRs. And I kind of touched on this with MCP and sort of the possibilities there with increasing the number of tools. But over time, we will be able to do more and more work for you at higher and higher complexity. The agent will be able to do kind of background work to know as you're typing, right? As you're auto-completing, because people still do type in their editors, and they should type in their editors. We will be able to say, oh, like what you're typing is actually going to trigger, this particular unit test to fail. Why don't I go off and just give me the green light, and I'll actually go off and fix that unit test before you're even done with your implementation of the function. And so you can see how as compute sort of gets more accessible, gets cheaper, and the intelligence gets higher, you can do a number of really, really cool things inside of a product with, again, those principles that you understand what the user is doing, you know what they're going to do next, and you have the tools and ability to do them. So we're really excited about kind of the future of AI coding development. I mean, I've spent a lot of my hours thinking about this problem, and I think this year is going to be quite amazing. I'm now going to walk through, I guess I prepared some demos for you to see sort of what Windsurf looks like in action. So the first one that I wanted to touch on is this idea of continue my work. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video. So what you're seeing here is we're using autocomplete, lightning fast autocomplete. We've been doing this for a while. We've just completed a new function. It's called handle full name change, and we're building a form in React. And you can see on the right side, all we had to do is say continue my work. And you can see that we've shown to the user, hey, we know that you made a change to login form because we just saw that, right? And it might have been made with autocomplete, it might have been typed, but we know that there was a change. And all you have to do is say continue my work, and you'll see that it's able to make changes on the user's behalf automatically using that as context. And so it's this, again, we're revisiting this idea of a pair programmer that's kind of watching over your shoulder and able to pick up where you left off. Here's an example of us building a web scraper. And the thing that I want to show off here is how integrated it is into your terminal in addition to the editor. So if we go ahead and start, we'll give it a prompt, right? And that prompt is able to run inside of our actual terminal environment. So we've tried to do our best to kind of close this gap between where Windsurf runs its code and where the user runs its code. And the privilege of being an editor is that we actually just have your terminal. And so we're able to run inside of your virtual environment. Here we're running inside of your Python virtual environment. And we're able to install packages directly as if we were the user, right? This is not happening in some kind of behind the scenes, like weird shell environment. This is happening as if you were typing this. And you can see, okay, it goes off, installs those packages, and now goes off and creates those files based on your prompt, based on your environment. Let this cook for a little bit. And it creates those files, and now you can see it actually can run your application. And what's really cool here is we try to tell the agent, the models are smart enough to know sort of what is safe and not safe to run. So of course they are able to know, okay, you have a new file, we should run that file. But what's really cool is we've instrumented a new way for people to kind of be hands-off. And we've implemented you should approve everything that I put out there. So there's like a high touch version. And then there's a version where you can just kind of go completely hands-off. We call this turbo mode, and you can go off and it can run whatever it wants. And then there's this middle ground, which is my preference, which is if you're running a command that I feel is safe, or that the model feels is safe, it can actually just go off and do that. But if you're going to run something like RMRF, or maybe updating something in your environment, you should probably ask me for approval first. And so in this way, we're trying to abstract as much as we can away from the user so that they can move faster. And in this case, it's saying, oh, I'm running web crawler. I can just go ahead and run that because that was in the original directive from the prompt. So it's able to run that. It's able to see the output. The output is very highly integrated into the response. And in this case, it's like, oh, I think we need an additional data set. So, okay, we'll go off and install that. So it's able to self-debug. And that's something that's quite cool about Windsurf. And then finally, we'll show you web search. So this is an example where I'm saying, look up Next.js documentation for me to generate an OG image at route.tsx. So I'm basically using English language, and you'll notice here I don't need to @ anything. There's nothing that I need to kind of @ docs. We do offer this capability, but it's a bit superfluous. We don't need to @ mention the file. We don't need to @ mention the documentation, and certainly we don't need to say @ codebase or @ web in order for the agent to intelligently decide, hey, I need to look at the web. I need to look at this file. So it mimics human-like behavior. And here we see, okay, based on this query from the user, and we know that we have the tool web search available, let's go off and search for some of the keywords. So dynamic OG image on Next.js, it's able to pull back a number of articles that might be relevant. And what's cool here, again, it's like magic. I still get this kind of like, it's crazy what these models can do. The next step is actually deciding which of these files or which of these pages that you want to read. So everyone's Googled something and you're like, okay, I don't want option 1, 2, 5, right? But you want to read a couple of the other pages. In this way, Windsurf has been instrumented to do the same thing. You don't need to read every single page that comes back. So it chooses to read the one that's from the official Next.js documentation page. And then it's able to analyze only the section of the docs that are relevant. Again, a way to save you tokens and effectively save you money. And it will analyze those bits and then finally give you code on the other side. And so this is an example of kind of end-to-end taking something from this page that you're seeing in front of you to code that is personalized, relevant to your organization, and relevant to your code base. So these are just three kind of ways that three demos of features that I'm quite excited about in Windsurf. But there's a whole host of other things that you can look at. Of course, we have tab, autocomplete, the agent, all these sorts of things. So with that, I will bring it back to Dianne if you want to take over the mic.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was so exciting. I love the demos. And once again, this session is recorded. So if folks want to reflect back and look at any of the demos again, these will be posted. Thank you so much, Kevin. I think before we jump into audience questions, there were a couple of different themes in your talk that really resonated with me. So first of all, I love the 3 product principles that you had, where it's around context understanding, ability to reason and take action. I actually also matched what I mentioned in the beginning around understanding, communications, and acting. So I love that there's like a hive mind happening here. I'm curious as to like, how did y'all arrive at those core product principles?
Let's see. I think it depends. It depends on which principle. I mean, the one that I point to often is the third one, which is scale with intelligence. Mm-hmm. I think we came out lucky. Like no one really knows what's going on here. No one has a crystal ball to say where things are going. The best you can say is like, I think the punk is headed here, and we should prepare for that future. And so we made the very lucky approach that or lucky, educated guess, whatever you may, that we believed agents were going to be the next thing. And so we very intentionally put our stick in the ground and said, we are going to delete our chat assistant. And that decision was fueled by this kind of desire and intuition that we've seen models change over time. So when we released Windsurf, we got rid of chat. We thought it would be a simpler user experience to just focus on the agent. And consequently, we saw users being very happy about that. And that kind of reinforced in our head that this was a principle that we wanted to keep. And that's when, we feel comfortable going out in the world to talk about it. But over time, before that, we've been in this game for 2+ years working on dev tools. At every sequence, there was a step function in model capability, right? Going from like Copilot, like autocomplete to 3.5, like we've come quite a long way. And each one of those decision points, we were like, oh, wow, like this is so much better. All that infrastructure we built, we can just kind of throw it away. And all this stuff around like context windows, for example, that game has completely changed now that we are living in a world with like agent-based retrieval. And so the landscape keeps changing. And I think over time, we've had the luxury of experience seeing these things happen and now knowing with pretty high confidence that the models will continue to get better and we should make this one of the product principles that we live by.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And usually when we have, builders and developers and folks, enterprises, startups, like building new applications, and they ask us like how to stay ahead. And it's exactly what you said, which is the pace of change is just unplanned. Like nobody can say top down, this is what's going to happen by November 2025. And there's so much around embracing that very like entrepreneurial prototyping mindset that's important, particularly because like that's how you know when something's ready, right?
Yeah.
Like I think when we were in the autocomplete world, it wasn't very clear yet. And if there was no prototype of like an agentic experience, then we would have just measured like autocomplete accuracy forever.
Yeah, which we did,
which we did, and yeah, I love that perspective. Maybe taking something around how you think about the future, and given that the models today are not perfect yet, how do you approach balancing agents and automation and autonomous behavior with human oversight?
Yeah.
Do you see a world where like there's always hands-on, human in the loop, or how do you kind of think about that transition for Windsurf?
Yeah. I am a technology like optimist. I mean, I have to kind of I work in the space. You and I are both very bullish on where these things can go. And so I'll come through it at that lens. But at the same time, I will acknowledge that myself and a lot of people on our team are incredibly skeptical and paranoid people. If you ever talk to me about these things, like I'm very, very skeptical that, some demo that I saw on Twitter will ever make its way into my workflow. And part of that is me being kind of a fussy engineer, but then part of that is also just, it's really hard to get to a level of perfection and quality that is acceptable to be in a production workflow. And I believe that at the current level of model performance, we need a lot of human in the loop. I think over time that will continue to decrease, but I'm always hard pressed to say at what point we will be comfortable completely getting rid of developers and getting rid of the people that kind of oversee the agentic SWEs, because there is that very important signal of human in the loop. And so an example of like maybe on the short term, what we've done to slowly work towards that goal, as models get better, I mentioned the ability to intelligently approve or run commands automatically. that's a great example of, I would not trust 3.5 to look at a command and say, like, green light it. But I do now trust 3.7 to say, all right, this looks pretty good, like, go for it. And so by 3.5, I meant like 3.5 turbo, like,
got it.
Yeah, so like the model, like,
Yeah.
many generations ago, right? And you can see just like the trend of things have gotten better. So we are now more comfortable giving that control to the agent. But we are still very much keeping the human in the loop, where you have to go through the files and you can accept all, or you can go through the files. And we want to give you that hatch to actually go in. And this is why we believe that autocomplete is something worth investing in. Our passive experience, typing in an editor, is not going to go away. And we're pretty bullish on developers still being kind of driver's seat writing code. I think over time, there will be certain workflows that will become more and more abstracted away. You might say, hey, I have a copy change on my website. Instead of having to go through 5 different people to make that change happen, you can go off and have something maybe asynchronously execute those things with one final stamp at the end to just make sure things are okay. And over time, you'll see the number of things in that camp increase. But I firmly do believe that, and our company is oriented around this, that human in the loop is here to stay for quite some time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And especially in terms of like the types of customers and how you've like thought about your product strategy, which is really around enterprise readiness. And so enterprises are also on different spectrums and mindsets of AI and technology adoption. And so being able to like have humans in the loop are really critical for enterprises where they are taking more deliberate steps and measuring progress that way.
Totally. Yeah. And I think we learned a lot here. Like, we coming out and just releasing Windsurf, like, Windsurf was not something that just came out of left field, at least, for us. We had inherited so many learnings, both on the technology side that we kind of discussed with retrieval and context awareness, but also on the enterprise readiness. Like, what does it take for a tool to become used by a customer like Dell, for example? So Dell is a user of our product, and what does enterprise readiness mean for the context of a company like that? We could not do that if we just came in and in a month just tried to build a solution like that. But it's over time, you have those battle scars and wins that have contributed to this understanding, and over time we've just kind of developed that muscle internally.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think it's similarly for enterprise customers, like being able to kind of get the first like demo or adoption is really critical. And there's, it's the technology has come so far, but maybe people's experience is still in a very chatbot world. Mm-hmm. And so having humans in the loop is a validation, right, of what is possible. And one thing I heard from like a customer is like, really the teams and the folks that are able to kind of see and draw the line in the future are folks who have been using these models, including Sonnet, for coding, because you can quickly see as you like start trusting it with autocomplete, then trusting it a bit more, a more complex task, just how quickly that evolution has happened.
Yeah. And there's a bit of like mental rewiring that happens with users, which I find quite interesting. I'm very, like, my percentage of code written by the AI is like very, very high, probably higher than the median. And it takes a bit of like intuition built over time to just say, in my gut, I know that if I were to type this particular character or approach the problem in this particular way, that the agent or the autocomplete or the tab, like whatever it may be, will be good enough and high enough confidence there. And so it does take some time to kind of get there. But once you have that buy-in, it's an incredible feeling.
Yeah, totally. I know we have some questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask just like one more question.
Sure.
And we'll turn it to the group. I think a lot of folks on this webinar are obviously developers, and so they're building like potentially AI-driven applications themselves. If you could go back and tell yourself and your team maybe 6 months or 12 months ago how to approach agents technically this year, like anything you would do differently or wish you did sooner?
Couple different things. I mean, I think from a very practical perspective, the human in the loop pattern is very important to invest in. So for example, user experience, then this transcends both front end and back end. The experience of a user using an agent is incredibly important. You would never put the classic like Ferrari engine inside a Prius and vice versa. Like these things need to match. And you have to think about how a user would interact with this and how that will feel in order to actually even validate the technology. For example, if we didn't have the agentic harness, and I know we've kind of discussed on the side this idea of like rapid prototyping, if you don't actually get the feeling of the product, there's a lot that goes into kind of qualitative feedback, and you really need to invest in the harness that goes around it. So like an example that I think is quite fun, when we prompt 3.7 to make a code edit, we want that edit to first have the file name at the top and then the edits on the bottom. So we prompt it in such a way where we get the metadata that we need in order to show the user what is going to happen. And while the rest of it is streaming, we're streaming in the edits. But you can imagine there's like two different worlds. If you didn't have that, you'd just be staring at a loader for like 10 seconds. And then you would get the file name and you'd be like, oh, okay. And then if it's wrong, you've just wasted 10 seconds. But instead, we will stream in the file name, and now you'll see, oh, I'm editing, file.py. And then you'll see the changes coming in, and there's more time for the user to both conceptualize what is happening and then also intervene if need be. And so these are ways that I think just user experience is incredibly important. And that's something that we've kind of held true, but I don't think we fully realized, because agents just introduced a whole new dimensionality of complexity into the product that we needed to have the proper user experience guardrails to make sure users were using this correctly. So that's one example, but I mean, there's many situations here.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, I definitely agree. This is why for us, like one of the things that and it feels like a very long time ago, but when my team and I had built tool use on the API a year ago, there was a lot of discussions around like how much ambiguity and how much do you have the models actually ask user back questions, right? Like, and I think just like the types of responses we had gotten at that time were, I would love to have verification at every step, like ask the user back. But actually, as developers started deploying these systems at scale, it's more like, wait, it was good that it asked the question back like for maybe 1 to 2 times. And then afterwards, I don't need you to like ask again for clarification. You should just know that. To your point earlier around like storing this knowledge and making it personalized. And so while the models are very intelligent, it's really around how to build the right product experiences so that like users not only get like the raw power of the model, but like are able to get to their outcomes faster, whether it's like more complex code, faster projects, more productivity.
Totally, completely.
Awesome. I think we have maybe time for 3 or so questions. So I'm just going to look in the Q&A inbox. In addition to tools choosing, do you let the AI choose, or do you have some guidance around prompts or code on like what tools make sense? I think this might be going back to some of your presentation around giving it like web search tools and group tools and others.
Sorry, to understand the question, is it how much should you instruct to use particular tools versus it inferring on its own what tools to use?
Yeah, I think the question is around like exactly like how much instruction do you give to the model versus like having the model make this option.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a great question. I think we've set up our system to infer tool use, and this is both on our agent harness, but also Anthropic's ability to deliver solid tool calling results on the model side. We haven't had the need, or users haven't had the need to actually explicitly instruct to use tools. And I think what I've found is that even if it doesn't call the correct thing, it's very robust. Like I think this is one of the biggest learnings I've had releasing an agent onto the wild. You can converse with it, and if it doesn't do the right thing on the first time, you can actually just say like, no, try it again, or be more explicit if you need to and say like, use the search tool, look online. And like just those 2 words alone will be enough to kind of steer it back in the right direction. And I think that's a really cool property of the agent, or the Windsurf agent, is like the ability to course correct. And so the answer to that question is like, I don't personally do this. I kind of let it infer on its own. It's normally pretty good. But if it does deviate off the rails, I have no hesitation in going in and just saying a couple words to just kind of get it back on track.
Yeah, it's a pair programmer, right? You want to like not be dictating or like micromanaging every tool or every action. You want it to be able to take some actions by itself and steer it back with some guidance. Fantastic. I think there's some questions around context window, actually. I've used Claude to develop a couple apps from scratch, putting code back into the knowledge base. However, it gets filled up pretty quickly. I think they're probably trying to do pretty complex things. Will Windsurf have the same limitations when using a code base that's too big that it can't process?
Yeah, I think, so if I understand the comparison, is it to Claude, like the chat application?
I think either chat or maybe they might be building their own applications experience, and they're running into like context window limitations.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, no, I mean, this is definitely a huge area of never ending. It is never solved. It is never solved completely. But this is like an area that we heavily invest in. And it's this step from I have a million things that I could put in to I need to put in like 1,000. And I think there's a number of interesting approaches that we've taken. The marketing term for one of them is called Riptide. It's this idea of we built our own re-ranker. And if you kind of Google that term, you'll be able to see. And I actually have a talk on what exactly that means. So that could be a very informative thing for you to look at with regard to re-ranking and deciding what to put into context. But there's a number of other things here that I'm trying to decide how much I want to go into the rabbit hole. The core problem is how do you give the LLM, like there's two axes. The LLM needs to understand what is important. Because if you give it too much information, it needs to kind of decipher what is relevant. And that's going to improve. And that's something that as a consumer of said model is not something that we think about quite as much. And I'm sure, Dianne, your team is working on this sort of thing.
Yeah.
On our side, we have to decide what are the most important things to then put into said context window. And a lot of that is around checkpointing. It's around mapping it's like map reducing a bunch of information into consolidated formats. And this is where we've spent a lot of time. So if you, over time, your code base gets longer or your conversation gets longer, can you look for intermediate representations of chunks of that to then stick into your prompt so that you can still meet that window? And similarly, there are going to be points when information becomes stale or unnecessary. How do you take that and like throw it out? And the nice part is, and this is where it comes back to scale with intelligence. The nice part is I don't think context windows will decrease. I don't think we're going to be more constrained on this. So over time, things will get better. So you don't want to hyper optimize on this point because maybe the next model will have, 10 times as amount of context. And it is a constantly changing landscape. So there are some strategies, but there's no silver bullet solution.
Yeah. And I think the other side of that is if we had models that had 10x more context, I think customers like yourselves will push it even further, right? Like for enterprises, databases and like repositories are even bigger.
Yeah.
So we'll just
never get enough.
never enough. Like quality could definitely improve. Yeah, definitely. I do think overall context quality is an area that is always under active research. Our assumption now is also that users are thinking about how to optimize the context that is given so that it's like, it's very precious and giving it the right amount of details and erasing or forgetting details that in the context are not important or techniques that be done outside of the model to improve quality. I saw a couple of questions around like overall Windsurf positioning. There are like a couple other coding agents out there. How do you all think about your principles and like when should somebody come and use Windsurf? Yeah.
I think we have always kind of stayed core to we want to build the best product. There's a lot of noise out in the ecosystem. It's a bunch of tools that people do reach for. I think we really land on we are going to be agent first. We are going to make sure that we inherit as LLMs get better. We will always be the best product that are using those LLMs. We never want a situation. We want it to model the product as if it's someone watching over your shoulder. And we never want it to be the case where there's like a disconnect in context. And so I think where you'll really see it shine is this kind of back and forth flow between something that is AI and something that is human. And the simple example is continue my work, but this transcends that, just that particular workflow. You'll get into situations where you're writing unit tests in parallel to writing like the function, and you want to have complete context over everything that's happening. For example, like the things that you then typed into the chat will then inform your tab, right? Like as you're typing, you'll now take into context like other things that are happening inside of your editor. So it's this idea of like unified experience. And you'll notice that I think from that dimension, Windsurf performs quite well. The other dimension I think is user experience. We've tried to boil this down into as simple a form as we could while still giving you these escape hatches to go into more advanced modes. This example being we just have a write mode and a chat mode. And so those, but it's everything is an agent. And so in that way, you're able to interact with a product that feels like there was a lot of care and attention to keeping you in this sort of like happy path and making sure that you have the best experience possible. So I think on those two dimensions, we're agent first, and we've invested heavily into our user experience. Those are two areas that you'll notice some improvements.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I think we're coming up at time. This hour went by super fast. I think there are many more questions. Unfortunately, we won't have time to get to all of them. But first of all, thank you to this really large audience for listening in. We would be very happy to share more about our content, both our vision on the Anthropic side on overall agents, as well as how products like Windsurf have been able to build with us and have built really cool product-driven development on top of AIs after this call. And like I said in the very beginning, we would love feedback. We'd love to do more of these webinars and bring more thinking around how to build frontier AI from folks who are doing it, like Kevin. And so really looking forward to seeing y'all in the future webinar. And thanks again, Kevin. This was so much fun for me to learn.
Thank you for having us. I mean, this was a ton of fun for me. Really appreciate everyone who came by and everyone who will come by and watch the recording.